Well, hey, good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing this morning? It is Saturday, whatever Saturday it is. It's March. I don't know. It's March Madness. I feel madness. That's funny. I'm not watching basketball. I'm not a huge basketball fan, so yeah, it's kind of funny. But it is March Madness season, so there you go. It is Saturday, March 18th, 2023. And yeah, so hey, good morning. Good morning. Hope you guys have a good cup of coffee or a good cup of tea, chai, something ready to go. Excuse me. I'm doing pretty good. Doing a lot better health-wise. I just got, I don't know. 'Tis the season for a little extra drainage, I guess. Lovely. Lovely. Great conversations for the morning. Well, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Again, you'd be amazed what that does for the algorithms. It really does help. So hit those, push that stuff out there, but let's get going. We are working on and continuing on our study into the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. So first thing you open up, this is what you're going to hit. This is the beginning stories. It lays the foundations for the faith of Jewish people, for the faith of Christians as we move forward, having accepted the Messiah, having accepted Jesus, and moving forward into our faith. This just lays those foundations and that framework of what we understand and what we know about God and how to move forward in that. So this is a wonderful book for us to be studying and getting into. Definitely great. Lots and lots of stories, and in fact, that's what a lot of it is storytelling. It's telling the narrative of God, of who is God, how does God operate, and how do we coexist? How do we work with God in life? And so this is a wonderful book, and we're continuing today on in this. This is our fifth lesson. We're looking at chapter 4, so we're going to cover all of chapter 4, and this is the story of Cain and Abel, which many people, if you've been around in Christianity for very long, or in faith for very long, or in America for very long, you've probably heard the names Cain and Abel. So today we're going to cover that story. So let's go ahead and dig into it. This is Genesis chapter 4, the entirety, verses 1 to 26. Let's do it in the English Standard Version. And by the way, again, I've said this probably 100 times, continue to say it. Read it in whatever version you want to read it in. Whatever version that you're comfortable reading in, read it in that. We're studying in the ESV because it's a really good, solid translation. I find that it does help to stay kind of consistent. And for doing more in-depth study, we want something that's a little bit more of a direct translation. And ESV is a great, up-to-date, direct translation from the earlier and the earliest manuscripts that have been found. So this is just a wonderful tool to use, and that's why we use it here. Now let's do it. So Genesis chapter 4 in the English Standard Version. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where's Abel, your brother? Said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methujael, and Methujael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. Adah bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who played the lyre and the pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, I don't know about you guys. You read this story, it can feel a little disconjointed, a little broken up, and almost like there's certain things in here go, why is this even in here? Well, that's why we're doing this, is to look into this and look into the culture, look into the language, so that we can understand some of the pieces that were just meant to be blatantly obvious. There's so much in this that just goes without being said. Like, if we were to tell a story like this in today's society with people around us that knew how we lived and what was going on, there's a lot of things that we say in stories and say in what we do that just goes without saying. We don't have to actually spell it out. Well, that gets lost over time, and so we want to dig back into that and kind of rediscover what was actually being said here. Well, this breaks into about 4 different areas that we're going to break it down to anyway. Verses 1 to 7, we see offering. 8 to 16, anger and murder. 17 to 24, the spread of godless civilization. And then 25 and 26, we see Seth. Okay, so before we really get into the verse by verse, let's take a second here. Many would consider this to be the beginning of the next section in Genesis. However, if you dig in through this as a linguist, so if you look at this strictly from the language standpoint and from the way that this is written, it's not only possible, but more probable that this is actually a continuation of chapter 3. Okay, this is a continuation of that story still, that the author, Moses, was wanting people to recognize that the fall didn't just affect Adam and Eve, but that this story, the story of Cain and then the beginning of Seth, was all part of the same narrative. That fall, initial fall, created a cycle, and then we watch that cycle go forward. And we're going to see when chapter 5 starts, so next time we have this, chapter 5 starts with an actual section starter, which we see throughout the language. I think we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but there's actual breaking points and starters inside of Genesis, how this is written, where we see these are the generations of. And we're going to see that at the beginning of chapter 5, which shows that that's truly a breaking point. this could still be associated with that, sure. And a lot of teachers would go with that and say this just goes with it. But realistically, based off of how Genesis is written, this sits more with Genesis 3 than with Genesis 5. Genesis 5 is meant to be written anyway as a breaking point to show a different angle and a different side. Excuse me. Feeling that. Whew. It's a fun day. So we're going to look at this as that, as a continuation of the narrative of the fall of man, and showing a contrast from good versus evil. Really, we have a problem with other competitors. Thank you for spamming. We love it. Love spamming here. That's a wonderful thing. Anyway, now let's dig into the actual story here. Verses 1 and 2. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife. We can stop right there for a second. Depending on the translation you look at, it might say lay with. The actual Hebrew literally translates as knew. And I guess one way you could kind of talk about that this is the biblical know, right? The biblical knowing. we do that joke every now and then, right? They knew each other in the biblical sense. Well, in a modern way to explain that, think of like the movie Avatar, okay? When they do the I see you, right? There's more to it than just physically seeing, right? It is to know intimately. And so this knowing is a very intimate knowing. Some could say the most intimate of the knowing that you could have. So Adam knew his wife. Yes, family show. All right. Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain, a worker of the ground. All right, so Cain, the Hebrew here, the Hebrew word for Cain sounds, meaning audibly, like the Hebrew term for gotten. And that has led many to believe that the term for Cain means the same thing as gotten, like I have gotten. And pushing the emphasis here on Eve as getting a man. Like this is like, aha, I have a man. Yes, I got it with the help of the Lord. But the emphasis here, especially in the way that this is written, is less on the help of the Lord and more on Eve and her getting a man. She had come from a man, right? When God had pulled the rib from Adam, she had come from a man, and now she has gotten a man and produced a man. Other fun note here, the term for man is actually grown man here. This is not a boy, this is not a child, this is not a baby, this is a man. Not saying she gave birth to a grown man, but the inclination here and what from the language is what's trying to be said is I have created a man. Yes, with the help of the Lord, so still giving some credit there, but that emphasis is I have created a man, meaning that there's now a cycle. Both of the sexes are completely dependent upon each other, but that she has created the man. Instead of having her come from a man, now a man has come from her. Now, Cain, if Cain does actually mean gotten, that would be a great way to foreshadow what is coming, right? This is a foreshadowing, and that's why they would say that it's at least sounds like, because this is a verbal narrative, right? This was originally done as a verbal narrative. And so it would make sense that to give him a name that sounds like, oh, he's gotten, like he has gotten, that child is gotten. Okay, thus that foreshadowing, which would be very, very fitting because Abel's name is definitely a foreshadowing because his name means vapor or breath, indicating that he is fleeting like a vapor. That's just a breath in the wind. It's gone quickly. Okay, very, very foreshadowing here. Many consider Genesis, especially, to be some of the best narrative and writing that you can find, especially in early history like this. But even up to today, it is fantastically crafted and created and written in such a way that it's just a beautiful narrative of how things are put together. All right, 3 to 5. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of the fat portions, and the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. This brings up that question of why? Why? Like, is God just a God who has favorites? I like Abel, but I don't like Cain. And so therefore I'm just not going to take anything from Cain. Well, we see an indication here in the next verse that that's not accurate. Literally the next verse to answer that question is, why are you angry? And then the next 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? If you don't. Okay, so we get an instant indication that it's not just God playing favoritisms. Okay, God loves his creation, and so he continues on for his creation. Okay, he loves his creation. So this isn't just a favoritism. So what is it? Well, there's a few different interpretations on that. They tend to boil down to either God likes and prefers blood for these offerings, which doesn't, I mean, it turns one of those, there will be blood, vengeance will be mine. Blood is what covers sin. I mean, that's where people kind of go with this, but it doesn't necessarily really fit here. And there's, again, a language reason to why that doesn't fit here. Looking at the Hebrew, looking back into the actual language, which, again, stuff that we don't necessarily see in the translation, which is why it's so important that we can dig into this. Into the actual Hebrew, the term used for Cain's offering, mind you, not necessarily for Abel's offering, but for Cain's offering specifically, the Hebrew term used here is minah, which means gift, but it really means tribute. But this specific word, minah, is used primarily for the first fruit offering. It's the first fruits. It's the first of the field. It's the first of this. This is the offering that is intended as a thanksgiving offering of, we have started to harvest. God, here is the first. This is that amazing stuff. If you've ever planted a garden, if you've ever gone and done stuff, that first time you have fresh produce to pull. That feeling of, it's here, we did it, we can make it, this is going to be okay. And you start pulling that produce off. The first fruits of that is an offering. And you're supposed to give that to God, right? That was that offering. Well, we have no indication in the text that he gave the actual first fruits here. Okay? No indication of that. That's the offering that's being offered. And they would know that, even though this is, and by they, I mean the people who are hearing the story at the time would understand, because of the term used for this offering, they would understand first fruits. God's not happy with this offer. Oh, okay. Goes without saying. He didn't give his first fruits. He gave an unacceptable first fruits offering. We don't get that in our culture because we don't understand it, and it's lost in the language and in our cultural context. There it is. Because of the type of offering, this is a first fruits. God's not happy with it because it's not the best of the first fruits. It's not the first fruits at all. Abel, on the other hand, does give his best. He gives, and we see it directly in the text. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. He brought the firstborn and the best. He brought that first. God, thank you for this flock. We're giving you the first back to you. This is fantastic. The rest is going to be okay, and we go forward. God was pleased with that. God was not pleased with Cain's. Why? Because Cain's offer was tokenism. Cain's offering was a tokenism. It was just we got to do it, so here you go. Here you go. Have something. I gave you an offering, God. What else could you want? Which is sad because we all do that from time to time anyway, right? When our heart's just not in the right place and we just kind of give God whatever we can give him or whatever. It's like, well, I know I should, but I wanted this thing, so I paid for that thing, and now it's just here, God, this is kind of what I got left. So here, this is that God loves a joyful heart. God wants giving back for the right reasons. It's not just to do it, but it's doing it for the right reasons and the right way. And that is the first indication that we see of that here. Okay, it's not because God had favoritism over Abel. It's not because it was done in the proper way. Abel said the right incantation and Cain did not. No, it's not anything like that. It's very simple. It's very, very simple, very, very plain. Abel brought the first and the best and gave it back to God, saying thank you. Cain brought something, and it was just because I got to give God something, so here you go. And we're going to say that why excuse me, why are they bringing stuff? Why are they doing this? Well, this is most likely something that was indicated to them by God. It's just not in the text, or by a part of the council who was already there saying we should give offerings to God. Okay, so they were presenting God with offerings. They're raised in the same household, right? They're worshiping the same God. Their parents knew God face to face. They already know this. They do this. So it's just one of those, they both raised the same way. One brought an acceptable gift to the first, the other just didn't. And we see 6 and 7, God's response to Cain, because Cain is angry. We see this, right? Cain was very angry and his face fell. He's, his face, like dealing with a child, right? We all have dealt with children when they get angry and they don't want to just explode on everybody, so they drop their head and face falls. It's not just sad, it is mad. I am not sad. Do not confuse sadness here. I am angry. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. So first of all, God recognizes that Cain's angry, not sad, because there is a difference. There's a massive difference, and God sees that, and he knows, because he knows inside the heart, he understands, right? He knows he's mad. Why are you angry? Why are you so angry that your face is fallen, that you're trying to hide that? And at least trying to control yourself right there, but still, why? If you do well, if you just do what you're supposed to do, it's going to go well with you, right? If you do well, will it not be accepted? But then he turns around and says, but if you don't do well, and this is, again, a little bit of foreshadowing for what's about to happen, but it's also great for us to learn with. If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you. God's likening the sin here with the serpent, okay? Crouching, waiting. He's likening sin to the serpent right here. That's a quick tie. But we also see that this is also used in the New Testament. Let's take a look at 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. God knows Cain's anger and instructs him to rule over his emotions, and thus to watch out for and avoid sin, going against God. But there's another key here. That is the stuff that we typically want to discuss. Hang on one second. Woo. Sorry, guys. Sorry for the live stream. This all gets edited out for the podcast, but for the live stream, it's live. There you go. One piece that we don't necessarily always talk about here in this section. It's something that it kind of goes against something that we want to believe about God, and so we just don't discuss it. We almost ignore that it's even here and that it's even happening. But that is incredibly dangerous. We have put God in a box, and unfortunately a very dangerous box, of unconditional love. We want to associate God and say God is unconditional with his love. But that is not accurate. Okay, God loves his creation, absolutely. Absolutely. But again, this is a weakness in the English language. God's love is unconditional. He loves his creation, period. Yes. Now it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. Let's shift the gears and the love that we also want to associate with that, because we have one word for love. And so that is where this becomes very, very dangerous. God's affection, so let's change terminology here. God's affection towards his creation is unconditional, okay? It's like with your children, with your kids. I can love my kids, but I can still want to tell them they're being a spoiled, rotten little brat, and I'm mad at them, okay? That affection is still there. I will still love my children, but I'm still mad at them, and I'm not necessarily accepting their behavior and their actions. That's the difference here. God has affection for his creation, yes, but he does not. That does not mean, and he does not have unconditional acceptance. And that is something that we have tried to force upon God, especially in the Christian realm. Okay, we're covered by the blood. I can get away and do whatever I want. I can do whatever I want now. That's not the case. God's not unconditionally accepting. Okay, this right here, this verse right here, verse 7. If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you don't, sin is crouching at the door, ready to pounce. You are really close to sin by not giving everything you've got, or not giving the best of what you have here. God's acceptance is not unconditional. And he points directly after that, and says, if you're not doing well, sin, like the serpent who took advantage of your parents, is crouching at your door. And then we see Peter later on, as we just went over, likening that to the devil roaring like a lion, seeking someone to devour. Not just as cunning as that, trying to just trick you, but they are ready to devour you. All right, keep going. 8 to 9. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. Now, we don't know how long of a time passed. Clearly, he's still angry. We also don't know what they discussed. We don't know how the conversation went. We're not given that in the narrative, and that's okay. Clearly, it didn't go the way Cain wanted. Okay, they're brothers. Could there have been a little, dude, if you had just given the best, like mom and dad told you, like I told you, if you had just brought the first fruits, it'd been fine, or do better next time, or maybe it was, God liked my stuff better. We don't know. Okay, again, they're brothers. It could have gone either which direction, because different brothers do different things. But Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? So a couple things here. Definitely, this is some stuff where culturally we don't understand this in the Western culture. Many people from collectivist cultures would still get much of this, a lot more than we would. So let's discuss this. Again, we don't see how Cain responds back to God. We don't see any of that extra communication between Cain and God. Nope, just Cain. That's just it. God says this. Okay. Cain goes and speaks to his brother Abel, continues to be angry, rises up and kills him. Okay. That conversation with God doesn't cool his anger. The conversation with Abel doesn't cool his anger. It ends up boiling over, and he responds in a very irrational way by killing his brother. God's just told him, hey, if you do well, it's going to go fine. If you do well, you're going to be accepted. Just do well. Do better. I tell my kids that all the time. You know what? You guys have this tendency to just, sorry. Finally, to the point of just quit telling me you're sorry and just do better. It's okay. Like, this is a learning experience. You're teenagers. It's awkward. We've all been through this. Just do better. Just do better. Try harder next time. Do a little bit better. Grow and move forward. It's okay. Same thing here. Like, you could just do better and you'll be accepted. But no, he just gets very irrational and the anger boils over and he ends up killing Cain. It's in the heart of man. Okay, sin is already there and it's in the heart of man and he ends up killing his brother. But the part here that, again, goes without speaking and would outrage most people in the rest of the world because it's just plainly and blatantly obvious. When God says, "Where's your brother?" and his response is, "I don't know, am I my brother's keeper?" That is an absolutely absurd response. Now, again, and it becomes so easy for us to want to think of this in a logical sense and say they're the first children, that kind of society has not been created yet, blah, 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 blah. We have to remember who is being written to. Who is this narrative going towards? This is going towards a group of people who have understandings inside of their society. Is this a direct story about two very specific real people who lived? Very possibly. In fact, I would say most likely, yeah, this are people who actually lived. But we're still telling a story to make a point, right? This is a narrative to make a point. Genesis covers the span of thousands of years. So if this is covering thousands of years, and they're only 50-some chapters, right? We're only going to glean different parts of this. He's being very selective of what's being shared here, which means he's trying to make direct and specific points. Right now, this is making a direct and specific point. In their society, Cain was the first. He is the eldest. He is the oldest brother. He is the one being groomed to take over for the family line and would be responsible for every other child, male or female. In a collectivist society, you have the oldest child would take over when the father dies, and all of the other siblings and their kids, if need be, and if they needed a patron, if they needed somebody to really help out with certain situations, that would be the one who takes care of the entire family line. Not just like our Western society, the nuclear family, to where we have our kids and that's it. I might look up to my parents, and then I look at my kids, and then maybe my grandkids. And when we get to that point, we're not there yet. And that's it. That's not how collectivist society works. It's all the way down. All the way down. Okay? For generations out. Like, it would be at least 3 or 4 generations out. And then it might break off again, so that because it becomes too much for one person to bear and handle, and so it breaks off a little bit, and then it breaks off a little bit. But it takes time. You have multiple generations that you're taking care of. And as we're going to see in the next chapter, when they were living 900 years, that's a lot of people. That could be a lot of people. And so in their mind, they're going to understand his response of, "Am I my brother's keeper?" is an absolutely absurd response. The answer to that question is yes. It is a blatant and blaring yes. You are the oldest son. You are directly responsible for that other brother, that child. You are your brother's keeper directly. And so the people would see this, and that would just boil over. Wow. Cain has no regard for family structure, has no regard for how life goes, has no regard for those around him. This really just sets up the narrative of a different type of society that does not care for family or family structure. And it just keeps going. Okay, he's trying to hide his wrongdoing, like his dad, right? Like Adam did. Adam and Eve, they did something wrong. Let's hide ourselves. He's trying to hide his wrongdoing. I don't know where he is. Am I my brother's keeper? But he does it in an absolutely absurd way that is, again, foreshadowing this ongoing society type and societal type that goes against God and against family. 10 to 12. And the Lord said, what have you done? Mind you, God is omniscient. He knows. He knows. He already knew the answer, right? He knew the correct answer, and he knew what he was going to say. But he gave him the opportunity to say it anyway. And he says it. And God just comes right out and says, look, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Hang on for a second. The voice of your brother's blood. Now, the blood here is plural, and it means spilt blood. Okay, it means spilt blood. Like, so not just your brother's blood, like he's buried in the ground. No, it is blood you have killed. It meant death. Basically, your spilt blood, like you've killed someone. Your murdered brother's blood is what this is saying in a very direct way. But the literal translation is the voice of your brother's blood, but blood is plural, is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. So this is God's response, right? God's response to Cain and his ludicrous response of, I'm not my brother's keeper. I don't know. And his response is, I mean, quite frankly, destruction. It's bad. This is a very, very bad response. This is something you don't want to hear God say. What have you done? The voice of your brother spilled blood. Like, I know your brother has been murdered, and he is speaking to me from the ground. His blood speaks to me from the ground. You probably remember some of that. If you were here for Hebrews, you might remember we went over some of that through Hebrews. Okay. God is outraged by the evil that Cain has done. And he likens Cain with the serpent. Why do I say that? Let's look at that. 3:14. The Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. How is he likening that? You are cursed from the ground, which really, another way to translate that and to write that is you are cursed above the ground, meaning you are worse off than the ground. So this is kind of a duality. The ground that you will work is now cursed even beyond you. It won't produce for you. And beyond that, you are even worse off. You are cursed above the ground. You have a higher curse than even the ground. You are cast out to be a nomad and a wanderer, and the earth is going to also pay a price because it won't work when you're around it. Okay? So he's tying this to the serpent, conceivably meaning that he is cursed more than the ground or cursed above the ground. This is all based on the language and the structure of it. Let's take a look. Keep going here. Oh, went too far back. Going too far back. 13 and 14. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And I almost want to read this in kind of that pouting, like, pity voice, because that's really what's going on. His response is self-pity. Cain's direct response, I kind of hope this is sinking in a little bit for today's society. Cain's response is victim. It is a victim response. My punishment is greater than I can bear. You've driven me away from the ground, and from your face I'm going to be hidden. And whoever finds me, I got to go wander the earth, and whoever finds me is going to kill me. This isn't fair. How are you a victim? How is Cain a victim? God's trying to explain to him, say, hey, if you do well, you're going to be accepted. But be careful, because if you're not doing well, and you're not minding what you're supposed to do, because sometimes our actions help us to create our mindset, and it helps to work with that. And so if we do things that are taking us in the wrong direction, the enemy and the sin is right there waiting to pounce. And you're going to start going the way of sin, and this is going to be a problem. And he let that anger boil over because God liked Abel's offering that was the right offering better than my offering because I didn't do it with a sincere heart and give the actual first fruits. I just kind of gave him whatever I could find, and he knew it. And he lets it boil over, and he kills Abel, and now he's the victim. He's the victim. Recognize what we're going through today in our society is not new. In fact, it's as old as time. That is how we get it. In fact, the first times we get it, at least Adam was able to just, okay, we screwed up. After trying to pass the buck and blame the woman you gave me, and she passed the buck to the serpent, and God finally says, here's what's happening. They accepted it. Okay. We screwed up. We got to live with what the consequence is. Are we happy with it? No, but that's on us. We did it. Cain, on the other hand, turns around and says, no, I'm gonna complain. I'm a victim. It's self-pity. His response is in self-pity. Instead of being repentant and turning and seeking the Lord, he turns into self-pity and finds himself. It says, whoever finds me, they're going to kill me. Now, mind you, Cain would be a relative to anyone, which again is something that we're not necessarily bound to hear here. He's thinking, I just killed whoever's brother or uncle, because he was my brother, and since we're all of humanity, I would have killed their brother or their uncle or their whatever at that point. Whoever finds me is likely to kill me because I have wronged the family as well. And so God responds. 15-16. The Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. Now, mind you, God's not saying vengeance, your family can take vengeance sevenfold. That is also something that they try to take and say that's our responsibility we get. But we know later on, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. He's saying vengeance will be paid on them sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain. Now, some say it would be like a tattoo. Some say it might be a scar. Some say, who knows? Who knows? But God put some kind of a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. And then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So God shows grace to Cain and gives him a protective mark. Now, 7 tends to be symbolic, and I always kind of struggle with the numerology section, and people want to read really deeply into numerology, and it can be kind of a dangerous thing to do. So I don't do it. I don't bring these things in too often, but this is one of those. It's just kind of there. So we look at this because the 7s are there. 7, when you look at this sort of thing, has a tendency to mean like the perfect cycle. You have 7 days of the week. So you have that. You can also see different cycles throughout. That 7 tends to be symbolic for a perfect cycle. So you see here in this perfect cycle, the full cycle and the perfect cycle of justice. Okay, saying if somebody does something to you, it'll hit sevenfold, meaning a perfect cycle of justice. I bring that up just because there's more going towards 7 coming up. So we're just going to kind of keep looking at that because that's a related theme here. Now, Nod, Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled, which is kind of a fun term because he's a wandering nomad, but he settles in the land of Nod. He just ends up being in the land of Nod. Where is Nod and what is Nod? Nod just literally translates as wandering. It's the land of those with no home. Some people have tried to put it on the map because it's east of Eden. Well, it just assumes you have to assume where completely was the eastern border of Eden, and that becomes a challenge as we saw when we went over where's the Garden of Eden section. But the land of Nod is literally just the land of the wanderers, those who have no home. But it's east of Eden. Why on the east of Eden? Well, the east of Eden was the only place that they made reference that was the cherubim, the guardian, and the flaming sword, moving every which direction to protect the way to the tree of life. puts him on the side that's heavily guarded so that he can't get into the garden and go and get the tree of life and the fruit of the tree of life. 17 to 22. Okay, this is the spread of godless civilization. So we see a little bit of Cain's line developing. Now, I said that we were going to see a repeat of 7, right? 7's kind of a theme. We're going to see that right here. Because this is 7 generations of Cain, starting with Cain. Cain is generation 1. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Enoch, when he built a city, he called the name of the city after of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad. Irad was father of Mehujael. Mehujael was the father of Methujael. Methujael fathered Lamech. There's 6. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal. There's 7. And he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Some translations would say harp and flute. Doesn't matter. Stringed instruments and wind instruments. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all the instruments of bronze and iron. His sister, the sister of Tubal-Cain, was Naamah. Okay, so we get 7 generations, and on that 7th generation, we see the splitting of that. Okay, you get children of, the extra children of, in that generational line, and we start to see what they produce. They produce poetry, song, forging of instruments and potentially weapons and bronze and iron, and they're farming. They're doing all of these different things. They're going after things that, when we read that doesn't sound bad. Why are you bringing this up? But they're all things that focus on their own desires and their own wants. This civilization of godlessness is still producing some naturally good things, but for the wrong reasons. They're producing it out of their own desires, out of their own flesh, and out of their own sin. And we're going to see a continuation go forward to show a little bit of that. But we're giving 7 generations of Cain, starting with Cain, then Enoch, Irad, Methujael, Lamech, which Lamech is a big one, and then 4 of Lamech's children. And we're going to see in chapter 5, we see some of the names here are similar to the names of the line of Seth. And Seth is the next child born, which we see here in just a little tiny bit, to Adam and Eve. I hate to say the term replaces, but kind of replaces in line Abel, and we see the godly line, and so we get a compare and contrast, so a direct contrast, even though the names are similar. We're contrasting a line that follows God, more so at least, versus a line that doesn't and completely revolts and goes against God. Okay, godlessness versus trying at least to be godly, more or less. Now, Enoch, this is not the one, if you're familiar with the stories or if you come from a little bit more of a Catholic background, this is not the Enoch that walked with God and was one with God and then was taken and ascended, right? This is not that Enoch. This is not the Enoch of the book, 1st and 2nd Enoch, or 1st Enoch and then also 2nd Enoch. Okay, this is not that Enoch. Totally different one. Cain's arrogance here also shines through in showing a complete abandon from God. If God doesn't want me, I don't want God either. Okay, it renames, and when he builds this city, and the term here, for city, or for city, really means that it had a protective barrier around it. It was a fortified place. Now, it could just be there's a couple buildings inside, or a building inside mainly, and they put a wall around it. Now, how big of a city is this? Probably not huge, but they built some kind of a fortified environment to where it had some protection from the outside. That is a requirement for this to be called a city in the language. Okay, so they built a fortified location, and he names this fortified location after his son Enoch, rather than something that would be towards God, which even the pagans would do, right? Even those who went completely against God, they would name their cities after their gods. Says, nope, all about humanity. I'm naming it after my son. And goes from there. This is just showing Cain's arrogance, and he's showing that he cares more about himself and his legacy now than about God, which was already there anyway because that was his offering. He gave God whatever he wanted so that he could have the best. Showing arrogance of Cain. Now, Lamech, kind of go forward, skim through some of this. Lamech represents a perpetual hardening in sin. Right? They were hardened by sin. They continue to be hardened by this. We see this here with polygamy. Okay, we see. Now, you might sit there and say, well, that's throughout the Old Testament. Well, yeah, and it's a sin that persists throughout the Old Testament. It's a problem that persists, but they knew that that wasn't supposed to be the case. How do we know that? Well, it goes back to Genesis 2:4. Man and a woman. A man leaves his mother and father to cleft or cling to his wife. A man goes to his wife. Not his wives, but wife. Okay? Just not, you can look that one up on your own. Just going to try to cover up some time here, make some time up. Okay? But one wife. So he represents that perpetual hardening by now he's taking polygamy. He's now taking multiple wives. And this upcoming lopsided vendetta scale. Okay. Now we also see here this sort of thing here today. God allows those who go against him to still prosper and to have earthly lives. He still does it. In fact, we'll see later in Genesis that really ticked him off that that even though God allows them to have this, they continue to go further and further away from him. And godlessness just is abound. It's something that just keeps going and going and going, and God just wants us to go towards him, and it kind of makes him angry. But God allows those to happen. He allows rain to fall on the just and the unjust. That's actually a good thing because they were farmers. Okay, rain falling is a good thing. Okay, they were focused on their pleasures rather than on God. They were focusing on their farming for their food, for their tummy. Focused on music, metallurgy, technology. This is also the first notes that we're going to see here of interactions with mankind and the Watchers, or if you get in through the Mesopotamian realm, which would be what Moses would be kind of referring to, would be the Apkallu. Okay, there's not really a direct note here, but we're seeing these people at this generation. This is when we started seeing all of this stuff happening. They started really doing all of this stuff, and this was stuff that was taught to them by what would be considered the Watchers, or the Apkallu for the Mesopotamians, for the pagans. So we'll get more into that when we get forward, especially when we hit Genesis 6. But just kind of a pre-note so that we're aware, some of this stuff we're already seeing indications of things happening. Okay, of this group of divine beings, spiritual beings or spirit beings, sons of God, his council who go against him, who work in and then manipulate society, kind of like the serpent, okay? Manipulate and change society to go more against God rather than towards God. But continue with this story here, 23 and 24. Lamech says to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. I love how preposterous he is that he has to say his own name. That's just storytelling. It's fine, but still, it's fun. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. Were they drunk and they bumped each other going down the alleyway? Like, those are two very different things. Did he wound you, or did he strike you, or what? But the arrogance continues on. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. If someone went after Cain, and their vengeance would be sevenfold, if someone comes after me, it's 77. It's huge. Okay? Lamech boasts here. He is boasting of his killing of this man. It doesn't come off as remorseful here. And why can I say that? Because if he was remorseful, verse 24, the revenge is sevenfold, now mine is 77, wouldn't be there. Wouldn't be there. He doesn't recognize this as wrongdoing. Okay? He is very arrogant and boasts of his killing of this man, likely just straight up murdering him for practically nothing. He alludes to this being an injury at first, like I was injured by him. But then it drops to, he just struck me. The way that this is phrased means this is likely not in wartime. This was not a war thing. This is just simply out of anger. The guy did me wrong, I didn't like it, so I killed him. Then he demands greater leniency than Cain got. Now, one thing I do want you to notice here, Cain gets vengeance, or would receive vengeance from the Lord. Sevenfold, times 7. Lamech demands 77 times vengeance. Fast forward into the New Testament and with Jesus. Jesus instructs to forgive 77, or depending on your translation, like the NLT likes to put it, 70 times 7. See that in Matthew 18:21. And the ESV says, and Peter came up to him and said, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Kind of like Cain. And Jesus said, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times in the ESV. Again, the NLT says 70 times 7 times. Okay. The importance here and the point is, it's not about the vengeance. It's about the forgiveness. Coming under the new covenant, coming under Jesus, it's about the forgiveness. All right, continue on. Let's look at Seth, 25 and 26 as we wrap this up. Adam knew his wife again, very biblical way, okay? Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Now pause here for a second. Notice the difference in her approach here. Notice the difference in the approach. God has appointed for me. Not just I got, yes, with the help of God. No, God has appointed for me. God has given. It's still a focus on me, which we all have a tendency to do, but she shifted and it went from I got, yeah, thanks God, to God has given. That is a shift. That is a distinct shift. Instead of Abel, for Cain killed him, verse 26, to Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Not Enoch, but Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, names mean something, especially in these narratives. So let's look at this. What's going on? Again, we're going back in time. This isn't literally, Cain doesn't have 7 generations down, and then Adam and Eve go, I guess it's time, let's have another child. No, this is just kind of narrative. We're going back. We're looking at a compare and contrast of complete godlessness versus we're trying to follow God. Okay? And so we have Cain's line, and now we get to compare that to Seth's line, Adam and Eve's other child that they had after Abel was killed. Okay? So we go back in time, and as we're going to see in chapter 5, next chapter here, Adam is 130 years old when Seth is born. Adam lives over 900 years, so that's okay. 130 years old when Seth is born. See that in 5:3. The narrative is written to give the idea of one line versus the other line, not necessarily, instead of going back and forth, Cain had, this had, this had. We'll do one line, and then we're going to go over to the next line, and we'll look at this. Now, Seth, again, as we pointed out, Eve's character and attention shifts, and it shifts off of just me giving, I got, thanks God, to God gave me. A little bit more humility, a little bit more God focusing. And it's noted by naming the son Seth. Remember, Abel was vapor, the breath in the wind, the vapor. Seth means granted. The name Seth literally means granted, showing that God granted and gave her another son. Why? Well, to go back to the serpent. God's gave us and has granted us, humanity, another opportunity to have a lineage and a line that could stomp out the head of the serpent. 3:15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he shall bruise your head, or crush your head, depending on your translation, and you shall bruise his heel. God has granted us that other opportunity to go down that. Now we see that Seth has a son as well here before we really get into that true break into chapter 5. But we see this happen here. Seth has a son, and his name is Enosh. Well, why Enosh when Cain has Enoch? Well, Enoch from Cain means dedicated and trained. Not like I have dedicated you to the Lord, but like he is dedicated in his work. He is dedicated in his craft. He is very focused. He is well trained. He pushes hard. He does hard work. He is a dedicated soldier. He is a dedicated whatever. Again, not bad things. These are good things. But it is man focused. The point here is Cain's line is themselves focused. They are focused heavily on themselves. Enosh from Seth. Enosh means weakness. Means weakness. Now, Sarna was a theologian, okay, back in the day. Sarna said it is the consciousness of human frailty, symbolized by the name Enosh, that heightens man's awareness of utter dependence upon God, a situation that intuitively evokes prayer. Okay, that comes directly from Sarna, who was a theologian who specialized in Genesis and Exodus. Okay, he spent his life studying the Genesis account. And it really is a massive symbol to the people. These people, remember, time frames matter. This is written and the story is coming from the group that has left Egypt. God saved them and brought them out of Egypt, but they're not to the promised land yet. They're being told this of the creation account, the creation story. Okay? This is by Moses. So Moses got the people out of Egypt, never made it to Israel. He never made it to the promised land. In between, he's making a point here in this weakness. You saw Abel was a vapor. He was a breath. Sin went against him and killed him, and earthly people, the people of sin, the people of the land, Cain's line, killed, seek and destroy, and they do everything they can to just prosper. It's all about them and them and them. Whereas godliness comes from weakness and meekness and this vapor, but they're focusing and they're putting that direction towards God. And it's the weakness of man that allows God and God's grace and strength to truly shine through, which is why then we see the other note in 26. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So what can we take away here? First of all, even in the sin-filled world, God allows both the godly and ungodly to procreate, to continue on, and even to succeed and have advancements and to better themselves and to better their lives. Just like today, it's real reality. That's just how God works. God found Abel's gifts pleasing as they were from the first, meaning showing honor and trust to God. They were of the first of his flock, the best. Whereas Cain's gifts were not pleasing, as they were likely given simply to say he had given something. God wants that relationship, not just obedience for obedience sake, right? God doesn't just want something. He wants it to come from the best. He wants it to come because we mean it. Cain's line continued to grow and grow further from the Lord. They seeked ways to increase their pleasure and their own desires. And 7 generations out, we see the perversion increase from a vengeance of 7-fold to 77-fold. And yet we get out to Jesus, and Jesus asks us to forgive 77 or even 70 times 7. And finally, God gave Adam and Eve another son, and they saw him as a gift from God rather than something they have done. Father God, thank you so much for your word. for this story that we can continue to learn and grow from. God, that we can look around us and we can see parts of our society today still being shown through and being shown true as part of human nature that happened thousands of years ago that we see in this story. God, we just thank you that you've given us insight that we can see and that we can learn and that we can grow from this. And God, that we ask that we can be like Jesus commanded and forgive 77 or 70 times sevenfold, that we can turn the other cheek and continue to move on, and that we can get to the point of being like Eve at the end and recognizing that you're giving us gifts. It's not stuff that we've done. It's not things that we've done. It's not about what we've done, but that it's about what you have done and what you have given and what you have blessed us with, God. We just ask that you give us the strength and the courage to continue to go out into society and be shining lights on a hill. God, to follow you and to show and to share your word through our lives and through our testimonies and through the things that we do and the lives that we live with those around us. Continue to be with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you all so much. Hope you got something out of this. And hey, we will see you guys next time. God bless, and bye.